And so if you don't live within a mile of one of those brick and mortar nonprofits and you aren't able to afford a private tutor, there's really no provider of creative writing education that you have access to.
Welcome to Global Radio.
Welcome, everybody, to Global Radio podcast, connecting you to young entrepreneurs in the nonprofit world. My name is Nelson Ngouenet, and joining me today is Rowana Meagher, founder and executive director of Cosmic Writers. Over the past 4 years, Cosmic Writers has brought professionals and college students into the world of literature together with one simple goal: to provide all children with the tools, knowledge, and opportunity to write creatively. Rowana, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. So, in terms of your entrepreneurship journey, how did that all get started? What got you interested in starting your own organization?
I fell into it completely. I was in college during the pandemic. It hit when I was a sophomore. And that spring, I was seeing how a lot of camps that really didn't have any business being virtual were being forced into the virtual space. And families were really at a loss for what to do to keep their kids engaged and socially and to have social interaction. So I started thinking, what's something that makes sense for kids to do from their computers? And I settled on the idea of a virtual creative writing camp. At the time, I was a student at the University of Pennsylvania, and I was very involved with the Kelly Writers House, which is Penn's hub for creative writing, both in the school and in the greater Philadelphia community. And I applied for a small grant from the Writers House to fund that summer of the camp. I expected this to be a one-time pandemic-specific project to provide some small relief during that very, very difficult time. And what happened was 150 families signed up the day that I opened registration.
Oh, wow.
And yeah. It was very overwhelming, very fast. And a lot of that demand was due to the pandemic, but a lot of it was also due to the fact that for a lot of families, it was the first time they'd ever had access to accessible creative writing education. What I would soon learn was that there are really only two ways that kids are able to experience creative writing education in the US. Number one, private tutoring. And number two, there are a few brick and mortar creative writing education nonprofits per major city. And they do very deep work surrounding the community that is in about a mile radius of each location. And so if you don't live within a mile of one of those brick and mortar nonprofits and you aren't able to afford a private tutor, there's really no provider of creative writing education that you have access to. So that was why I started thinking about this greater need for creative writing education. And I wound up growing WordCamp, the virtual creative writing camp, into a full nonprofit that sought to meet that need. We still run WordCamp. We just wrapped up the fifth summer in 2024. And now we provide other programming that serves to make creative writing as accessible as possible in the US and beyond.
No, that's awesome. I think one of the things with the pandemic has shown that there's a lot of opportunities to be able to increase the spectrum of what is available, and with so many people having devices, so much stuff can get directly given to
Yes,
students.
definitely.
In terms of growing WordCamp and seeing the other opportunities, how did you think about what other services that you could potentially provide to the population that you're serving?
Again, this all arose very organically. Most of our programming came directly out of conversations that I've had with teachers and students and parents who are seeking creative writing education. When we were in the first few months of Cosmic Writers, we did a lot of experimenting to see what kinds of programming most resonated with our audience. And so what we eventually got to is not what we started with. Um, I think that there is a lot of value in a lot of different kinds of creative writing programming. The main difference between where we started and where we are now is that we used to do very, very bespoke programs for every school that we worked with. And while I would love to keep that up, unfortunately, number one, unfortunately, it takes a level of funding that was not sustainable for us. We received a startup grant that allowed us to provide it for free for the first year, but that kind of funding was not easily replicable, because it took a huge number of hours in order to create this customized curriculum and program for every partner. And then number two, and this is, I think, this is the more mission centric reason. Number two is that what we realize that we were best at is the moment where we are igniting the spark of love of creative writing in kids. And doing these longer, more in depth programs was really helpful for building literacy. But there are other organizations out there that build literacy and do an incredible job of it. And there really are not as many organizations that are focused on that moment of telling kids, hey, this is an option for how you can hone your literacy and communication skills. This is a way that you can develop your voice as a writer and as an individual. And so we decided to focus less on these in-depth programs and more on breadth. And we switched to a model where we are now doing more more one-day workshops and more um, and we are now also publishing a series of creative writing activity books, which kids can do on their own and or teachers can bring into their classrooms in order to bring creative writing education to as many kids as possible with as low a barrier to entry as possible.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. It sounds like you've, in terms of what you're thinking about with regards to the writing education ecosystem. When you think about the curriculum development for each of those individual partners, has that, as you've strayed away from something that's more specialized to each partner, how did that change the thought process in terms of developing out a curriculum that can suit the needs of everybody?
I think that in a lot of ways, our time developing these individualized curricula from partner to partner served kind of as R&D for our activity books because we got a very clear sense of what different kids were looking for. Our first activity book in the series, the Monster Building Handbook, is based on our monster building workshop. And I can't even tell you how many times we taught that workshop for a bunch of different audiences. So we were very familiar with which parts of the workshop the kids were most engaged with, and how that varied from group to group, if at all. What we learned was that the kinds of variations from child to child and school to school are often in how you teach rather than the content itself. And so, in order to allow for flexibility in that, we also produced an educator's guide that has a corresponding curriculum along with suggestions for how to adapt that curriculum for students with different needs. One thing that we've found is that the cosmic writer's approach to writing tends to resonate really well with neurodivergent kids. That is not something that I personally had in mind when I started writing curriculum for us. My background is in sociology. That was my major in college. And my my thesis and a lot of the research that I did leading up to starting Cosmic Writers was about teaching for kids from different racial and socioeconomic backgrounds rather than focusing on neurodivergence. But as I learned, a lot of the time the same tactics work really but well for both kinds, for diversity in both of those sectors, because the answer to how to teach in a way that is inclusive often boils down to number one, flexibility, making sure that your curriculum can be adapted to different kinds of learners, and number two, that you're being explicit about the kinds of rules and norms that you want your learning environment to have. And so those tenets have been really helpful to our approach to education for neurodivergent kids, particularly those who have not previously been especially excited to write. Because a lot of the time, the way that writing is taught in school, it's very structured and it's boring, honestly. It's geared towards state tests. You have to write your little paragraph, and it doesn't really, you don't particularly care about what you are writing about. And with creative writing, you're developing the same skills in that you are communicating clearly. You have a point, whether that is an argument or a narrative, and you have to defend it. In a narrative, it's less about thesis and then evidence. It's more about justifying why your character acts the way that they do via the events that happen to them and their traits. But they're really a lot of the same skills. And so kids who previously had not identified as writers, but who did identify as, for example, dungeon masters in D&D campaigns, or players of The Sims, or video gamers. God, video gamers isn't a phrase, is it? I'm not a video gamer. That's probably obvious. But kids who perform storytelling in other aspects of their lives, but who don't call themselves writers, can often see themselves as writers for the first time when you are teaching writing through a more creative approach. And so those were lessons that we learned throughout those bespoke workshops that we then applied when we were creating the monster building handbook, and then also the corresponding curriculum and FAQ for adapting to different populations.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. One of the things that I wanted to dive in a little bit more on is when you're talking about rules and norms in terms of creativity. That seems counterintuitive. How do you kind of create the rules and norms that you would need to be able to sponsor or allow for creativity to flourish?
Thank you so much for asking that. I would like to clarify that it's not so much about rules and norms about creativity, it's rules and norms for what the education environment should be like. The example that I always give is from the researcher Lisa Delpit's writing. She does a lot of work about the differences between Black and white cultural norms and what kids versus their teachers often come into the classrooms thinking of as the proper way to act, and it often leads to um, a lot of friction because white teachers are not clear with their Black and brown students about the kinds of norms that they expect. And so the example that I'm going to give, I think, is the absolute clearest way to to convey this. White upper middle class white people tend to give directions as questions. They'll say, "Tyler, can you share your homework with the class?" And if Tyler is a working class Black kid, Tyler probably is living in a household where if somebody wants him to do something, they say, "Tyler, you should share your homework." So when Tyler hears, "Tyler, can you share your homework with the class?" he is interpreting that as a question, which is what it sounds like if you're not familiar with the norms of whiteness. And so if Tyler says, I'm not actually terribly interested in sharing my homework with the class. No, I'm not going to do that. Then the white teacher interprets the kid as being disobedient when that's not at all the case. And so if the white teacher is clear that in her classroom, when she is asking a question, that she means it as a directive, or she does a better job of learning the norms that her students are growing up with and just uses a directive as a directive, then that is how the teacher and the students can be on the same page about classroom norms. But if that's not explicitly discussed, then that's often what leads to a lot of children, particularly children of color, being branded as bad kids.
Mm. Yeah, no, that's super interesting, especially with thinking about communication between different groups of people and different types of people. One of the things that, in terms of communication, that I've noticed is a lot of ramp up with regards to training. Is that something that in that FAQs portion, that when you think about giving the books to educators, that's also included when thinking about the delivery of that course material to their classrooms and the populations that could vary in different areas?
I'm so sorry. Could you clarify about? Could you talk a little bit more about a greater emphasis on training?
So in terms of thinking about the books that Cosmic Writers is able to bring to the classroom environment, is the communication portion with regards to the educators that are receiving those books, is that something that is also talked about in terms of getting that to the forefront with regards to getting the curriculum out there?
Oh, definitely. Yes. And not all of this is in there. I wish we had more space, but part of the goal is to make sure, again, that this is as low barrier to entry as possible. And we're creating these materials so that educators don't have to create them from scratch. We don't want to stick them with this incredibly long manual that they have to read or they feel they have to read in order to teach the unit in their classrooms. But we do cover as much of it as we can reasonably. And I think that a lot of our values are pretty clearly embedded in the tools themselves. Like there are options for student choice in the books. For example, there are certain writing prompts where you have a write solo and write with a friend option. And so my hope is that even though I think that this sort of training is really important, that we're being realistic about what kind of burden it's fair to put on teachers and have the books be as effective as possible with or without additional training. Although we also are offering professional development in addition to the curriculum because teachers do often seek it out.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. That's definitely one of the things with regards to the system in the U.S. That's kind of crazy. The burden that is on school teachers and the expectation of what they are able to do. I think that's one of the areas where definitely we as a nation can help and try to bring more bring more action into that arena. Um, in in terms of growing cosmic writers, uh, how had it been at the start with regards to thinking about building out the organization in and of itself, and how did you other than the organic growth that you talked about, were there other strategies that you utilized to help increase or accelerate the growth of the organization?
Absolutely. My co-founder and I spent my co-founder Manoj, who is more on the finance side of things, and I'm more on programs and operations. And I spent the first couple of years talking to everybody we could about Cosmic Writers. And I mean, we still talk to everybody we can about Cosmic Writers because you never know who's going to be interested. But particularly at first, when we were still figuring out what kinds of people and institutions would be interested in interfacing with us, I think that the absolute best thing that we did was to move through the world as constant ambassadors for our work. And as we've learned more about the kinds of people and institutions that are the right fits for us, we've been able to become more targeted in who we reach out to, what kinds of partnerships we try to form as we grow. And certainly on the fundraising side, we have grown our network of individual philanthropists. We were very lucky that because we grew out of the Kelly Writers House, and the Kelly Writers House is an incredibly generous institution, they introduced us to some of the people who would become our largest donors. And so that was our jumping off point. And then we asked those people to introduce us to their friends. And some of the families that participate in our programs, they are very philanthropic. And we ask them to introduce us to their friends as well. And then on the side of growing our programming and bringing more schools and libraries and community organizations into our work, we started out in the Philadelphia School District because our founding board chair, Patrick, was the chair of the Home and School Association at his son's school. And he introduced us to their after school program. That was where we piloted our first in person workshop. And from there, we asked that school to introduce us to other community organizations in Philadelphia that they thought would be in need of creative writing education, and so on. We also have met people who have become real advocates for us, particularly our board members, of course. And a lot of our growth, I think, both in terms of programmatic growth and fundraising growth, has come through this much larger group of people moving through the world as ambassadors and advocates for cosmic writers. And growth has manifested in a lot of different forms from them. There are, um, we've met program partners, through our board members, we have met operational services organizations that have contributed to us. One of our board members is a branding consultant, and he brought in his friend who is a graphic designer to rebrand our design pro bono. And I mean, that I feel like is an incredible example of growth, but in a direction that you might not think of when you think traditionally of growth. And just generally, the members of our community, everybody brings something different and interesting that allows us to become a stronger and more impactful organization.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I think one of the things that you highlighted in particular in terms of putting the legwork in at the start and being your own ambassador and building that ambassador network is amazing. It's definitely one of the things that, as somebody that's started organizations, I've had to do that myself, and sometimes it's tiring work saying the same thing over and over again and talking to different people, but it's amazing to learn and hear stories and see what value you're bringing to other people's lives.
Very much with you there.
In terms of kind of pivoting a little bit more towards your other passions with regards to your novel, how did you get started in terms of writing a novel on top of the organization, and what was it like going through that process to get something that is into the state where it's going to be published?
My novel writing actually came significantly before Cosmic Writers. I wrote my first book when I was in middle school. It was a middle grade novel. I queried it to agents. I did not get any bit of interest, but I got a lot of good feedback. And then I wrote another book in high school, and this one garnered a little bit more interest from agents, but it wasn't publishable. It wasn't ready yet. I shelved that one around the time that I entered college. And then when I was in college, I had the good fortune of taking a young adult fiction writing class from Nova Renzuma, who is a really extraordinary young adult author. And I started what would become my book, the one that will be out next fall, in her class. At the end of that class, this book, it felt different to me. It felt like this was the one that was going to work. And I asked her to be my advisor for an independent study to finish the first draft. And I was very, very lucky that she accepted. She has been an incredible mentor to me, and having consistent feedback from somebody who is such an expert in knowing what makes a novel work, I think was really essential to writing a book that could become publishable. And so this was coincidentally around the same time that we ran the first season of WordCamp. That was when I started querying my novel, Secrets of the Blue Hand Girls. And after that, so the way that you get a novel published, if you're going if you happen to know people in the publishing industry, things work differently. But if you're going in cold, what you do is you send a letter called a query letter to a bunch of agents. And the query letter is a very specific genre of writing. It's sort of a combination between jacket copy and a little bit of a bio about you as a writer. And usually agents ask for a query letter and the first 10 pages of the book, some variation on that. And what you do is you make a spreadsheet with all the agents who you think might be interested in your book. That information is public. When most agents are open to cold queries, and they will say on their websites, I'm seeking in XYZ genres. I really like to see characters who exhibit ABC traits. And so you organize these agents and you send out these query letters, and if an agent likes it, they will give you either a partial or a full request, which means that they want to see either part or all of your manuscript. And so then you send it over to them, and you wait 6 months. I would say that's probably the average response time, and you hear what they have to say. And the vast majority of the time, you don't hear anything back even after the query letter, or you get a form rejection. That is by far the most common response to a query because agents are absolutely inundated with query letters. They get hundreds per day. But if an agent thinks your book has potential, then you get a bite. I queried 50 agents to get my agent, Amelia, who is absolutely fantastic. And that is not a particularly high number of agents to query. Most authors, I think, probably end up querying. Over the course of my time querying all of my books, I've definitely queried, I don't know, 100 to 150, tons and tons. And so after I signed with my agent, that was not a guarantee that the book would be published. When I signed with my agent, she gave me some feedback. I did a little bit of revision, and then she pitched my book to publishers. And that is similar to the process of the author pitching to agents. There is a chance that a publisher will like you, but it's not a guarantee that being on submission will lead to a book deal. And I was on submission for quite some time. I was on submission for a little bit over 2 years, which is that I know is unusually long by industry standards. I had been making my peace with the fact that I did not think that this book was going to be published. Um, I had recently gotten into a new relationship, and I had been telling my partner that I was that I had this book, but that it was that I didn't think it would ever have any readers. And then the next week, I got a phone call from my agent saying that it had sold in a 2-book deal. I was shocked about this, especially because it had been about 10 years since I started writing my first book to get that phone call. So at that point, um, a lot of the past year has been focused around contracts and a lot of technical stuff. My editor sent me my edit letter around the beginning of the summer. I did a total rewrite of the book in accordance with her feedback. Right now, I am finishing up my last content revision, and then after that, it will go to copy edits, and advanced readers copies will come out in the winter.
That's amazing. That that's crazy that the process has been this long, but it's super nice to see that all that hard work is coming to fruition.
Thank you so much. It's very strange to think about that this is something that I have now been working on for the majority of my life. When the book comes out, it will be about half of my life split between pre being serious about writing and post being serious about writing.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that a lot of people, especially that are outside the entrepreneurship lens, that when they look in, they don't realize that most people start way earlier than what people normally think, and things become a 10-year overnight success.
Oh, absolutely.
You mentioned Nova Rensuma. In terms of advisors and mentors that have been throughout your process, even with the book writing process or any others, how have you thought about seeking out those advisors, and are there any things in terms of feedback that you would have if you were to do the process over again in terms of going through that journey?
I was very, very lucky that somebody who writes in my genre and is a role model in my genre was a professor at my university. And I think that that was the best possible environment in which to meet a mentor, because she by becoming a professor, she had already signed up to care about young people's writing. And so I think that if you are in a position where you have people who have self-selected into mentor adjacent roles, that's the best possible way to find a mentor. I think that in terms of whether I would do anything differently, honestly, I really looked into having the best possible writing mentor. And so I don't think I really would. I do, however, I would like it to be more accessible for people to find mentors like Nova, which is one of the reasons why Cosmic Writers exists. We have a program called Cosmic Coaching, which is a series of one-on-one mentorships between adult volunteers and young writers. And that is, I hope, an opportunity for people who are under 18 and who are not in college environments where there is a lot of emphasis on writing, or any environment where there is an emphasis on writing, to be able to find somebody who can provide them with individualized feedback and who genuinely cares about them and their growth. And that's something that I wish that I'd had before I came to college. And it makes me really happy to see a handful of young novelists who are working with cosmic coaches. Not everybody who's in that program is writing a novel. It just happens to be the one that a lot of those kids have gravitated toward.
Yeah, no, that's amazing, especially since you're able to almost pass that forward in terms of being able to fix the problem that you had when you were younger.
Yeah, exactly.
In terms of thinking about time management throughout this whole process, how do you think about that when you're thinking about your schedule? Because I assume that your schedule is very, very busy in terms of managing the foundation and then also managing any deadlines and deliverables for the book process.
I am not the right person to give advice on time management. It's something I'm really struggling with right now. It's something that I am making it a very high priority to learn how to get better at. At the moment, what I'm doing is I'm not really doing book and cosmic writers work in the same day. Instead, I am switching my hours around so that I can spend full days on the book, and that often means that I've been working a lot of weekends lately for cosmic writers, and a lot of really, really long hours, so that I'm able to have a day that is totally a writing day. And honestly, that's really not ideal. I think that I it's really important to me to engage fully with the people I love. And I think that in a period of time like this, where there's very high priority work going on with both my book and Cosmic Writers, that I'm not able to do that as much as I would like to. And I mean, I know that that is specific to these more crunch time type of periods, but the problem is that a lot of the time in the entrepreneurship space, every day is one thing, one mistake away from a crunch time period. And so if anything goes wrong, then immediately the stakes are very high. And so I am really trying my best to figure out how to balance things better going forward.
Yeah, no, that's amazing advice. I think that's one of the things that I'm also working on as well too in terms of self-improvement. And I definitely know a lot of people can use the fact to say, okay, hey, improving on time management is a good thing, and being able to even think about the systems that you can create for that is super important. In terms of Cosmic Writers in general, so what does the future look like for Cosmic Writers? What's your long-term vision for the organization, and how are you thinking about expanding it?
Thank you so much, and thank you for your solidarity on getting better at time management. I think that the future of Cosmic Writers is really centered around the activity books. I think that they are our best way to get creative writing in front of as many kids as possible. And so the Monster Building Handbook will be the first in a series of books that focus on different creative writing genres, all of which are derived from our workshops, in order to make writing feel as interesting and fun to as many kids as we can reach. We are hoping the first book we publish independently. We are now in conversation with a couple of traditional publishers about publishing the rest of the series with them, which I will be very excited about. If that ends up working out, that is definitely very high on my goal list. The reason why we published the first one independently is that middle grade activity books are a really, really hard sell. And so I wanted to make sure that we had a track record of sales before approaching traditional publishers. But now that we've had some success with the first book, we have a case to make that not only is there a need for the book in terms of um, in terms of us wanting to make a difference in how kids learn writing, students and teachers also are feeling that need. So that's a super high priority for us. And then along those lines, we also want to reach kids in a broader variety of geographic locations. We are on the ground in New York and Philadelphia, and so that's where most of our partners are, including for the activity books, because that's just where we had the pre-existing connections. But now that we have something that can be used anywhere and we can do our professional development virtually as well, I really want these books to become a tool for use in countries around the world. We do have a somewhat global presence because of our virtual programming. So far, we've reached kids in 35 states and 15 countries, but a lot of those are a couple of families per state or a school or two per country. And so I would really like the books to become much more ubiquitous. We also just published a Spanish version of the Monster Building Handbook, El Manual de Construcción de Monstruos. My Spanish accent is bad. I'm sorry. Um, and so that is something that I'm very excited about as a tool to help us reach kids in Spanish speaking countries and in areas of the US where Spanish is the dominant language. And overall, I would love to, and this is a much more overarching goal, but I would like for Cosmic Writers to have an impact on the culture around how writing is taught in the US. My program director, Kristen, said this the other day, and I think this is a really brilliant way of summing up our philosophy. A lot of the trends in how to teach kids how to read in recent years have focused a lot on really fun and engaging reading material. And for some reason, writing has not trended in the same direction. Kids are reading cool and fun and interesting things, but they're not being asked to write in cool and fun and interesting ways. And so my hope is that Cosmic Writers can have a little bit of influence on the way that educators view writing instruction so that it can so that there is as much of an emphasis on being something that kids genuinely want to engage with as there is with reading.
That's amazing. In terms of that global vision, and this is a bit of a question with regards to the differences in writing styles. Have you noticed that as you try to explore thinking about the expansion process, is there any research that's being done in terms of different writing styles with regards to creative writing that is taking place around the world?
So this is a soapbox of mine. There is almost no research on creative writing education. Most of the research comes from the UK because culturally there's a bit more of an emphasis on creative writing in the UK than I think anywhere else in the world. But I guess that's kind of your answer because that's the only country that I've found has done serious research into creative writing education at all. There is just a huge dearth of knowledge about this. Cosmic Writers is based on a combination of research about best practices for writing education in general, best practices for culturally inclusive education, and excuse me, and a little bit from creative writing education in the UK. But we've had to fill in a lot of gaps through trial and error that frankly I wish that we did not have to. I think that there needs to be much more scholarship out on how to use creative writing to boost kids' writing skills.
That's something that's going to be super interesting, and maybe a partnership with GSC at Penn could potentially be of interest in terms of doing research on that front.
That's on the list.
That's awesome. In terms of how people can find out more about Cosmic Writers or get involved, what are the best ways to do so?
Thank you so much for asking. There is a page on our website, cosmicwriters.org/get involved, that will detail all of this. But Cosmic Writers it's very important to us to have ways to get involved no matter where you are in your life or in your career. And so if you are a child, we would like you to participate in our programs. If you're interested in volunteering in a way that contributes to Cosmic Writers, we are always looking for beta readers for the rest of the series of activity books. The Monster Building Handbook is highly influenced by the Cosmic Writers participants who beta read the book and gave us feedback on what worked about it, what didn't. So that's for children who are younger than 14. For kids who are 14 to 18 and also adults, we often run creative writing tables at neighborhood events in Philadelphia and New York. So if you want to volunteer with us at one of those, that is another amazing way that you can get involved. Then if you are a college student or older, I mentioned Cosmic Coaching. That is our creative writing mentorship program. And if you'd like to volunteer as a Cosmic Coach, working one-on-one with a young writer to improve their writing skills, that is something else that you can do. And then we are also currently seeking board members. This is a big project of mine right now. We are looking to fill a couple of open board seats by the end of 2024. And so if you are a mid-career professional looking to give back, please contact me about a board seat.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Rowana. It was really a pleasure talking to you today, and we hope to hear from you soon. We're looking forward to tracking all the things that you have in store.
Thank you so much for having me. I really, really appreciate it. And I'm very excited to listen to the other episodes on this podcast when they come out.
If you'd like to support our work, please like and subscribe to our channel. Thank you for listening to Global Radio, and stay tuned for the next episode.